Did you know that 30% of real estate portals around the world still do not offer a map view for their listings? Less than 5% of portals around the world have travel time search, and less than 1% of portals around the world have any true form of AI-powered search. How do I know this? I know this because I've looked through all of them. Why am I talking about it? Because we are talking today on this special episode of the podcast about the Portal Standards Report 2025, which you should all see in front of you. I'm delighted to have for this episode Simon Baker. How are you, Simon?
I am bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as they say.
Excellent. And the report sponsor, Taha Dar, CEO of SearchSmartly. How are you, Taha?
Very well, Ed. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Well, no, the pleasure's ours. Honestly, you are easily the most relevant sponsor of this report we could possibly have. To introduce our listeners to SearchSmartly, your area of expertise is around property search and discovery, property listing enrichment and personalization. You've got clients all around the world, including REA Group, who I found out recently. It's quite an impressive list. The other thing that I know you guys for, or the reason that you first came on my radar, is that you actually built your own real estate portal to test out your theories. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a way to kind of validate a few theories and hypotheses that we had around where we thought search might be going. And it's a bit of a tough ask to start working with portals just on a hunch. So we built essentially a proof of concept portal to validate some of these thoughts that we had in the UK, and then built our B2B facing company on the back of those learnings and insights.
Yeah, that's a really committed way to test your theories. The other interesting quick fact about you used to be a Formula One engineer. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. With Red Bull Racing, the F1 team for 5 years through Sebastian Vettel's championship winning years.
Wow. Cool. Some real pedigree.
I got a quick question on that, because I like my Formula One, and B, I'm curious, what lessons can you take from being in a high performance championship winning team and apply that to let's say remarkably different business? What are the learnings that you could bring across?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Simon. And I think what really excited me about that sort of interplay was the value of data, right? And I think, it's a very old adage, data is the new oil and all that sort of stuff. But in the world of Formula One, there was such a thing as too much data. We were getting lots and lots of real-time data from the rail race car on the rail race track. And one of the big gaps that existed at the time was, how do you make sense of all of this information that you're getting in real time to make fast and efficient decisions? And for me, the interest that kind of interplays between these environments is that in the world of property and specifically search, there is too much information for the typical consumer to make sense of across different locations, different homes. How do you make sense of so much that's potentially in front of you to make this decision of what is that right place to call home? And so really it comes down to, how can we help people make effective decisions by bringing data in, distilling it down to the really key insights, and then empower people to act quickly. Because people hate the hundreds of hours they spend on the end-to-end process of a transaction. It's one of the most stressful experiences that people face. Let's ignore the part where people just browse for the fun of it. That set aside, it's still a painful process, and we're trying to kind of bridge that gap, and very similar sort of reasoning and rationale under the hood to a 200 mile per hour Formula One car.
Yeah, and I guess the key difference is that in a Formula One car, you're getting thousands of bits of data per second, and you literally have a 75 lap race to exercise decisions against that data. Versus buying a home, you probably don't have as much data. It's certainly not coming as fast.
No.
And you have 3 months to make your decision. So it's a very different dynamic, but the same underlying driving cause.
Yeah.
Okay. A bit of context for anybody who's not familiar with these reports. This is the third version of this report that I've done. That's why it's called Portal Standards Report 2025. I did pretty much the same thing in 23 and 21. essentially what this is, I have looked through personally, not AI, personally looked through, I think it was close to 1,100 real estate portals for the data in this report, with the idea being to understand what features come, quote unquote, as standard on a real estate portal. Now, I've kind of given away the headlines here, but the gist of this report is that real estate portals essentially are, let's say, reticent to adopt new technology, right? We'll start with these headlines. 30% of portals still don't offer any kind of map view. I would say it was a surprise to me, but this is the third time that I've done it. Taha, was that a bit of a surprise to you to hear that?
Yeah, it always is, right? If you're spending a lot of time at the cutting edge of what could be, it always is a bit of a surprise to see what currently is. But at the same time, if you take a step back, I think part of this comes down to the enduring legacy of portals that started life as classified directories, right? They were not necessarily built from the ground up as, user-first discovery platforms, but rather as these online advertising boards for agents and vendors. And also now, I think as those markets have evolved, various incentives have come into play in different regions. So for example, in some regions, some parts of the world, some portals quite literally don't have the data to show an accurate map-based location for a listing. And that sort of non-exclusive model is maybe partly to blame here. There's an incentive to withhold the exact address so people don't kind of bypass the agent in the middle. And then secondly, possibly related, in some markets, you've got a very high agent fee relative to other markets. And I think there's a logical argument to be made that the higher the fee, the greater the temptation to skip around the intermediary, being the agent. So again, maybe there's a rationale there as to why maybe some portals will push back on that element. And obviously, user behaviors get entrenched. If you're used to not searching via map, and you wake up tomorrow and there's still no map, then potentially, that disjoint between what can be and what is can drag on for a bit longer.
Yeah. So there are, with the map, I do have a certain amount of sympathy with real estate portals on this one, because there are, the issue around exclusive mandates and so on. Where I have less sympathy is where there are real estate marketplaces in places like the Netherlands, where normally we would expect to see a map, and in some cases we don't. We'll move on from the map. The map, I mean, that's kind of an obvious, that's been around for years and years. The one or the several of the features that I looked at that continue to really surprise me. Less than 5% of real estate portals out there have travel time search. I don't get this. I was expecting, when I first looked at travel time search in 2023 and saw that the figure was something like 3.5%, I was expecting that to shoot up, and it just hasn't. Now, why is that? I can understand it from the point of view of management at real estate portals saying this is going to cost us loads of money for an API call every time we do it. That can't be it, though, right? I mean, we know that travel time search is useful, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, it is useful. There's a lot of people out there that think in terms of commute time as opposed to pure distance. It's got very obvious upsides in driving discoverability to other locations, because I remember reading somewhere, I think it was an estate agent's report a few years back, but only about 1 in 3 seekers end up transacting in the area where they started their search. And of course, commute time or travel time based search helps drive discovery to other areas, right? Secondly, it isn't that complex. If you're working with an API provider, what you are getting back from that API provider is typically a shape. And that shape is very similar from a database structure level to a normal postcode-based search, which also is some sort of shape. So technically, it isn't immensely difficult to figure out how to integrate that. So why don't more portals offer it? I think, yes, cost could be a factor for some smaller portals. I think maybe there's a cultural element to it as well, right? Portals are hesitant to disrupt the traditional way of search, I would imagine, because it's the golden goose, right? And perhaps there's some element of fear of the unknown. So you've got the location-centric approach that has obviously worked very well. And do you want to replace it wholesale with a commute search, or do you just want to introduce it as some sort of parallel option for users? I think that's kind of how many portals leap into that space, by offering it in parallel. And there's some nice ways to do it, right? One of our customers has this box where you click the address to start entering your search, your normal search. You get this little pop-up where you can continue typing in the address, but then there's a small call to action that says, hey, if you want to use this as your commute destination instead, we have this other way of doing things. And they were, interestingly enough, the first portal, I believe, in that region to have travel time-based search. So they're kind of helping guide the users within that market as to what this new experience can look like and how it can create value for you as a seeker. So it is surprising. I think, as we know, the industry does take time to kind of adopt new technology. But I think it's clear that there's a lot of value upside.
I'm curious, I'm sure you're not allowed to say, but could you give us a hint into like the usage of these tools? Because I'm sure there are people listening to this now saying, oh, the users don't actually use these tools. They're just kind of for show, and actually users aren't sophisticated enough to really bother using these things most of the time. In your experience, and without necessarily revealing client names or numbers or whatever, could you give us an idea of like, is travel time search actually being used on these portals?
Yeah. The answer top level is yes. And I think there's two parts to it. One is demand depends on exposure, right? Consumers won't know that a feature exists until and unless the portal exposes that and makes some element of a deal about it to let people know that this functionality is there. And so where the portals are potentially a bit shy about kind of showing this new thing front and center, that is going to absolutely impact that adoption curve. So if people haven't seen that feature before, they won't know where to expect it. So there's one element there where portals can actually drive usage themselves and kind of accelerate that adoption cycle. Secondly, what I would say is that where commute-based search has been rolled out in a visible way, like this example I mentioned earlier, where you can click into the address box, start typing something, and it's very clearly marked out that you can use this as a commute destination for a commute-based search. If you look at that company, they saw a usage of that API-based functionality grow by about almost 5x within the first 3 months. So yes, they were a new player not a new player, but a new introducer of this functionality. So their users didn't know that it existed before. But that's very significant growth in a very short amount of time for a completely new sort of way of doing things compared to this tried, trusted, traditional way of doing search. So that I think is noteworthy. And I think value can be particularly high in a few specific sort of use cases as well, right? Urban cities and urbanizing cities where buyers are exploring new areas that are literally sprouting up from the ground. Tools that drive discovery are almost critical. If you look at, I'll just pick a random example, right? In the Middle East, a lot of development happening in real time in locations and neighborhoods that people may not have known about or even heard about, or they may not have even existed prior to that particular developmental project. So how are you going to know that it exists? How are you going to end up searching for it the traditional way? It's very hard. Whereas with a commute time-based search, a portal can drive visibility to developers and agents in a much, much more intuitive way. And that's very closely linked to like the new homes listing. And I know that's a big driver for a lot of portals. They're really trying to get closer to the developers in many markets, directly like building relationships with developers. And I think in those cases, travel time-based search can add a lot of value because, again, the brand of this neighborhood that is being constructed or redeveloped doesn't exist, or the brand is changing and the developer is trying to change the public perception of what this area has to offer. And so you might not intuitively search in that neighborhood, but commute time search can very naturally drive people's eyeballs towards these areas.
Okay, Simon, I'm curious here. You've been in charge of a real estate portal. I'm curious to know at what level a functionality like this gets discussed. Is this something that would go as far as board level? Is this something that just gets discussed at the product level? Is it something like something that fundamentally can change the way a user searches on the portal? Like, at what level does it get discussed, and what are the kind of considerations that would go into saying yes or no to something like this?
Yeah, it's certainly not a board level discussion. If it was, then the company has got its priorities wrong. The way I view this is an option for a user on how to search. The challenge is, when a lot of people come to the site. The question is, how does someone arrive at the site? Okay, now most people do not arrive on the homepage, although that's what we type in, www.x.com, not X, but you know what I mean, abc.com, and we'll then get the homepage. Now, from commentators and people in the industry, we do that because that's our first step. But the majority of people who are looking to buy a home are probably coming via a Google or more and more via AI. And they're landing on either a listings result page, or they're getting straight to a property itself. So they're having a different experience. So I think when you think about things like travel time, it has to be embedded at 3 levels. On the details page, hey, you're looking at this house. Do you want to see how far it is from where you work? Okay. And now hopefully it knows where I work because I've entered it once and it's stored somewhere. And then I can go, great, see other homes with same distance, plot on a map. So you start the journey in a different direction. B, it's on the listings results page. So all the listings, map these listings. Okay, great. Oh, wow. Travel time, this one, even though these two houses are not that far from each other, the travel time by public transport is dramatically different because of different train lines, who knows what. Or 3, on clearly the homepage as an option. That decision is usually the product guys coming up with something. This is how we can embed it across the business, across the consumer experience. Now, how does that fit into the overall direction we want to take? Do we want to include this? And then the trade-off, of course, with things like travel time is if it's, and this is where I think it's an interesting question, if it actually gets me as a user to an answer faster, it means I look at less advertising along the way. And if I look at less advertising along the way, the portal doesn't make as much money. Right? So you have this sort of problem where the consumer wants the most efficient journey between search and destination, especially on something like a classified site where the portal is not rewarded for the transaction. So it's not Amazon, for example, but the portal is rewarded for any leads generated. Now, leads generated is a function of inefficiency as much as it's a function of efficiency. The more, and it's a curve, right? The curve goes the following. If I am super efficient, I'm going to generate a small number of leads. The more inefficient I become, I generate more leads, but then I become too inefficient. So then I start generating less leads. Okay. So you have to pick your point of inefficiency where you maximize your lead outcome. Sorry, I'm sounding like a Formula One engineer here. Okay. But you have to find that peak performance of inefficiency. Okay. It's a bizarre way of thinking about it, but it's actually truly how, if I'm running a portal and I'm making my money off leads generated, so therefore the customer is happy. Okay. And especially if the customer is looking at those leads just on a volume number versus on a convertible number. And most agents, dare I say, are still looking at a volume number. I got 500 leads from you. I got 10 from you. Ed, you've sent me 10. They all converted, but you only sent me 10. Whereas, Taha sent me 500, but 5 converted, but he sent me 500. So I like the 500 more than the 10 because I don't have the internal capacity to really track to conversion. So I hope that sort of a little intellectual deep dive shows that the more efficient you are, the less money you're going to make.
No, that's very good. I actually might. That's a nice way of putting it. I might ask you to write me an article on
I might have to write
the inefficiency curve. Sounds like a good name for an article.
And inefficiency.
We'll
you know what? We've got. That's actually a good way to think of it. The inefficient. Profiting from inefficiency. The answer to your real question is it's not a board level decision. It's usually will end up somewhere around CEO, COO, because at that point you're looking at the holistically between. If all I'm looking at is from the consumer perspective, I want to be as efficient as possible. If I'm looking at it purely from the advertising salesperson perspective, they want to be saying, how do I generate most leads to the agents? The two are sometimes at odds with each other.
Okay.
They are at odds with it. Not sometimes, actually are at odds with each other.
We'll in there, just real quick, guys, is when you have a commute-based search, typically you're seeing significantly more listings in total. The idea here is that you have more listings and you're trying to then surface the more relevant ones. But compared to like an area postcode-based search, you might, let's say you've got 50 properties within your budget and number of bedrooms. If you do a similar commute-based search, you might have 200. So Simon's right. You're probably going to be generating fewer absolute leads that convert better. But maybe there's a counter argument there that the agent is getting broader visibility. So where agent A might have shown up in 1,000 searches in a given day with area-based search, they may show up in 3,000 or 4,000 searches in a given day with commute-based search, because people who aren't even looking necessarily in their patch are seeing those listings come up. So if through reporting and so on and so forth, you can show agents that, hey, look, yeah, you got fewer absolute leads, but you're getting better visibility. The difference is these are just better leads coming through the door. There's potentially an argument to be made to kind of convince them, let's say, that there's obviously better value, because obviously they care about leads that convert, whether they can track them or not. Different question, but that's where they make their money too, right?
Yeah. Now what makes this more complex completely is the rise of agentic type search. Not even agentic search, just AI driven search.
Okay? We'll get to it. I promise.
Oh, okay.
I want to talk about this. This is another one of the headlines of the report. For several years, I tracked every time a real estate portal said something along the lines of, we have done something with AI, it went on a spreadsheet. And the end result is this. Basically, what this graph is saying, that real estate portals liked or still like to talk a lot about using AI, right? Except when it comes to search, because the percentage of real estate portals out there that have true AI search, or at least that had true AI search when I looked, was 1%. Now, I should point out I was quite picky about this. These are some of the ones that didn't make it onto the list for various reasons, usually because they're just trialing it on the mobile app. They're cowards. Or it's like a co-pilot that's not really designed for discovery, or it's something that's just not that sophisticated yet. 1% of real estate portals out there have true AI search. True, type whatever you want into a box or speak whatever you want into your phone kind of AI search. Now, given what we've just spoken about with business models, is that surprising to you, Taha? You work with these portals, you build things, like this. Is it surprising to you, or is it just a function of all of the headaches that go into putting something like this into a real estate portal?
Yeah, it's one of those really interesting questions, really, because it's so new and so many people are just trying to figure out, where does AI sit within their stack? Is it something for internal tooling for their developers to move more effectively, all the way up to, does it become a core part of our product, or does it even replace our product? I think it's important to distinguish when we look at search between AI for search, like you've talked about, or even AI for enrichment, because I think there's a very important distinction there. Enrichment is what I would call, tagging photos with features like kitchen island or lots of natural light or wooden floors. Actually, a lot of portals are experimenting in that sort of space. And then obviously you have true AI search, where you let users describe what they want, maybe in a natural language sort of context or voice, and then surfacing the right homes. Right, only a handful are doing that sort of second step right now, because enrichment is actually a core part to get to step 2, let's say. I've seen some experiments being done where some portals have run a little experiment where they've opened up an LLM-based search, and that LLM search is now basically functioning as a glorified set of filters on the existing data that the portal holds. The number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, the price, what type of property is it, like detached, semi-detached, but not the really deep, powerful, rich stuff like, what sort of natural light is there? Is it an open plan kitchen? Is there a pool out the back? Or what's the view like out the window? Is it a city view, or is it a mountain view or water view, et cetera, et cetera? So you need to kind of get the first part right before you can be really effective at the second piece. So I think that in of itself, I think, takes its time to work its way through the product pipelines. Another factor I'll say is that reliability is still a challenge. Generative AI, while impressive, is still prone to many mistakes. And this is a high stakes sector, whether we like it or not. Accuracy matters. There's many laws that prevent misadvertising. And so portals, when we speak to them, sometimes are nervous about, okay, your model is saying it's 94% accurate, or there's 94% confidence that you have detected a dishwasher in this kitchen. But do we really want to say that there's a dishwasher in this kitchen if there's still a 6% likelihood that that's not true? So this is also why, we do things slightly differently. We're using computer vision models for tagging because they tend to be a bit more accurate than LLM. So there's a technical challenge of like how you solve that problem that needs to be worked through the R&D pipelines as well. And then the business model, right? Ed, you touched on this earlier. Portals make money through promoted listings and obviously the commercial logic baked into their search algorithms. Handing too much control over to an AI system could undermine that. So the question is, how do you thread AI into search while keeping those commercial levers intact? Again, something that we're thinking about and working with portals around. And look, I think the first place for portals is to just start by hacking stuff together, giving the developers time to implement test solutions, and just giving enough leeway to product teams to open up a small percentage of users, like a classic A/B test, and just see what you can learn from that. And then gotta go from there.
Yeah, I think what was interesting for me looking at this wasn't necessarily the small numbers of real estate portals that have adopted this and put it front and center. It was more looking at like something a bit more radical, something that might change the way that a user interacts fundamentally. Now, one of the reasons, I'll be honest, the reason why SearchSmartly stuck in my head when I first came across you guys is because you were, I'd say, the first example I've seen of a different way of doing things where the user can't see results, can't see listings until they've answered a series of questions. Right now, that's a different way of doing things. I've seen it in a few other places now, and we'll probably come back to it. But going maybe a step further than that and coming back to, I promised you, Simon, we would talk about AI agents and all the rest of it. And this example that you can see on screen here, Fly Homes. This is the only example of what I kind of speculatively think could be coming next, the next kind of iteration of the real estate portal. They have built and actually now sold. I'm not sure why they sold it, but they've sold the portal part of their business. Fly Homes is a brokerage in the US, and they have or had this way of searching where it's essentially a chat, and there's an option to basically not have a search results page, not have a list of all of the different properties that match the user's criteria, right? And it's essentially a chat-based search, and they've had the guts to actually, put it front and center. Simon, we talk on this podcast a lot about, how agentic search may end up disrupting real estate portals and all the rest of it. Do you think that this example, Fly Homes, you may or may not have seen it, it's perhaps a harbinger of what we might see portals looking like in 5-10 years. Essentially a chat-based search where there isn't necessarily a search results page, or a search results page is an option that you can use or not use.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things wrapped up in this. One is, after 25 years of searching a certain way and people being indoctrinated about how to do it, enter suburb, enter bedrooms, enter bathrooms, whatever, press go, list, click, 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 search, will that go the way of, hey, Simon, what are you looking for? How much you got to spend? Where do you want to eat? Where do you work? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I've curated the results for you. Okay. So it's really, will that jump occur? Now, if I am buying, so the question is, I think, less scientific and more human behavior. And so when I think about it, I'm going, well, if I'm looking to buy, if I know what I want to buy, a certain car I want to buy a BMW X5, and I live in a certain suburb, I don't want to travel too far, and I want to buy a secondhand one, what's available? I'm happy to have that chat with a search, because I already know the answer I want. I just want to know where it is and the best price I can get in my budget. So I'm not really in the search phase or the discovery phase. I'm in the buy it phase. Therefore, this is where these agentic searches become super easy. I want to fly from A to B. I want to buy this car. And so I need to buy a ladder, right? That's X meters tall, and away we go. There's sort of things I know I want, and I don't want to waste a lot of time doing it. Just do that for me and get the thing delivered to me. I think the problem with a house, which means that it's good for portals, is that buying a house is a discovery process mostly, where I'm not only discovering what's available, but I'm really discovering what I want and can afford. There's a self-discovery as much as a what's out there discovery. And remember, when I'm buying a house versus buying a ladder or a car, right? It's a transaction I'm doing once every 7-10 years. It's my biggest asset. It's probably 90% of my personal wealth for most people. And that decision process usually involves many people. Okay, my husband, my wife, my kids, who knows, my broader family. And so it's all about discovery of what we can all agree on, and what my real needs are, and what I can really afford, and where I want to physically base myself. Okay, so there's a whole bunch that goes in that discovery process that leaps from an intellectual thought, yeah, I got to move home, to I'm going to physically spend 80% of my time in this house, in this suburb, in this part of a city, a town, a village, or whatever. Okay, and B, now I've got to discover, well, what are all my choices? I didn't really think about having a pool in the backyard. Oh, I could have a pool there. Oh, but wait, it snows half the year. So, whatever, right? There these discovery processes which become exponentially higher when you're moving from city to city or country to country. So therefore, in that world, I think the role of a AI as a co-pilot becomes more powerful than being the search itself. Because I think there's always going to be in the back of people's minds, but what am I missing out? So portals will have the power, I guess you would call it, if they position themselves, and it's all about branding, as I have the market covered. If you look at me, you're not going to miss anything. Okay, I will show you everything if you want to see it all. Okay, and you can go through it one by one. Because there'll always be this doubt, yeah, but there'll be this hidden gem that hasn't been found. I think when you shove agentic search in front, there will be a degree of skepticism that people will have that what am I not seeing? Okay, the unknowns. And so people are a bit scared, will be scared of not seeing that. So they'll say, no, show me more, show me more, show me more. And all they end up doing is progressively seeing the list anyway. Okay. Now, that is irrelevant if I'm buying a ladder or I'm buying a BMW X5 because they all bloody well look the same. Okay. And it's there for a function, not an experience. If you think about it. Although BMW would argue that, the ultimate driving experience, but still a car to go from A to B, and I know what that car is. So I think there's the element of human behavior is one that I think will greatly impact the adoption of these sort of searches. However, I think more and more people, especially at the rental end of the market, where they are less emotionally attached to the outcome, will rely on agentic search to uncover the results. Now, and I was just looking before at SimilarWeb and referring sites, and basically it doesn't matter where I go, from Rightmove down to small little sites. The number one referring site is often ChatGPT. Okay. Now, what's happening there is more and more people are asking ChatGPT, I want to live in this area, what's it like, and so on. Now, that is progressively replacing Google as the way to search because it becomes more interactive. Now, the thing about ChatGPT or Perplexity or Manus or whatever is that they take on the role of the search engine, of the portal, because they are indifferent to whether they're getting a listing from a portal or from an individual agent site, as long as it's answering the real question or the conversation it's having with me. And you can see, so therefore, that then starts to be like a layer on top of a portal. So when we bring it all back, if I'm on a portal, I'm probably wanting to see the market. So the role of search, AI-driven search, should be around, hey, I'm your co-pilot. So, hey, Ed, thanks for searching in, I don't know, Brighton in the United Kingdom for a house. What are you looking for? I'm your co-pilot. You can talk to me at any point in time and I can help narrow down the search for you. I can save you time if you want it, right? It's a plus, not a or. It's an and, sorry, not an or. Okay, that's how I think about it. And then I think there'll be another group who are separate, who go, I love ChatGPT, I love Perplexity, whatever it is, and I just spend my whole life asking them questions. Okay. And it answers the questions it gives me the good answers. I can now even say, put together a small web Manus. I love it. I was playing with it with one of the people we've had speak on the podcast before, Malcolm McCallion. We were saying, hey, let's put together, I want to live in this area in England. Please create all the listings for me and create a website for me. Manus does all of that and gives me a link to a website that has all the listings. And the listings are coming from individual agent sites, some from on the market, some from Rightmove. It doesn't care because it's sort of indifferent. It just looks for quality at the other end. So I hope that rather long-winded answer sort of gets to the point where I think this is horses. We say horses for courses, and the role of AI is more co-pilot on a portal rather than replacing the search.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so what we're saying is that me looking through 1,000 portals to find if they've got it or not might have been a waste of time.
No, actually, it's not a waste of time, because what it's probably revealing is that the portals are still a long way off from really understanding consumer behavior. I don't think they actually understand it. They understand little bits of it, but not holistically. And they haven't cracked the code yet on how to really integrate the technologies into that user workflow or the user experience.
Okay.
in a way
All
that
right.
is truly beneficial.
Okay. We'll leave AI search aside just for a minute, and speculating about the future. I want to talk a little bit about what it's like in these real estate portal companies right now. If you've read this report, you'll kind of get the overarching message from it is that I'm sort of calling these real estate portals either Luddites, people who are scared of technology, or kind of cynical people who don't want to lose their business model by giving access to technology to their users. However, I'm sure that's not fully the case. Taha, you work with these people, you know, you'll have an idea of how they're thinking about these things. What are the attitudes, the prevailing attitudes in some of these companies, and what are some of the challenges they're facing when it comes to getting some of the technology, some of the features in this report in front of their users?
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting actually to kind of speak to different companies, see how they're thinking about things. It's clear, right? Everyone's thinking about this at some level, whether it's at a board level, like what's our strategy for AI versus, on a tech team level, running different hackathons to try and see what they can build and what direction of travel they want to go in. One thing that I've observed is like a little bit of a cultural divide around how portals approach innovation. And a part of that is how they're structured and what incentives different people within different teams have. So, and before we go too far, obviously, one obvious disincentive to innovation is that nobody wants to be the person that killed a very profitable product or business, right? So that's the baseline that you have to keep in mind. Risk taking obviously has upsides, but there's a huge downside when you're talking about a market leader and their product that you might, totally ruin. So that's something just keep at the back of the mind. One thing that we notice is that sometimes portals have a large internal tech team. And if you speak to that internal tech team, there's a very strong incentive to want to build stuff internally because you are an in-house tech team. Why are you here if you aren't building innovative things? That can obviously be a barrier to moving fast and adopting things quickly because every portal has lots of stuff that's all equally important on their roadmap. And much of that is not AI, right? And then some portals more recently have brought in sort of innovation directors, director of AI, director of innovation strategy, and things like that. And sometimes these roles don't have large teams reporting into them, at least not right now. And so the incentive within that role is to figure out how do we move quickly, as opposed to how do we utilize our internal tech team to do something specific. And so sometimes you see willingness to move quickly exists in those roles in a way that you don't see elsewhere, just because that's the way the incentives are structured for them and how they look internally within their company. So it's a really interesting sort of thing. It's a classic large organization challenge. I'm sure Simon has seen this in a lot of detail. Like, how do you keep that desire to move quickly and empower people to move quickly when you scale well past being a startup? So that's a really interesting thing that we've seen, which is a barrier, absolutely.
Okay. Simon, I keep coming back to this. I, as the person looking through all of this, I'm just seeing the raw data of like who has got something, who hasn't got something, and it's very binary, right? Apparently, there are attitudes, there are people that want to change, etc., etc. But, and as we've spoken about several times on this podcast, it seems to me that these portals are waiting for some sort of like Goldilocks zone here where like they will damage their business model the least and consumers will be ready the most, right? There seems to be this theory that there's a Goldilocks zone where, if you change things outside of the Goldilocks zone, things are going to go really badly. My impression is that nobody knows when the Goldilocks zone is, and it's probably sooner than most of these people think, right?
Yes. The way to think about it is if we go back, if we teleport ourselves back 25 years, a bit more actually, 26, 27, 28 years, and we were a newspaper, we were waiting for that Goldilocks zone. Okay. We were waiting for well, we don't want to damage our current newspaper revenues, but we know we're going to do something on the internet. How do we sort of hold back the internet as best we can? We maximize the value of what we've currently got. I think we're going through that same phase at the moment because there have been large businesses. If you're Rightmove, if you're REA, if you're Scout24, so on, you've built a big business that's super profitable, very valuable. You've got shareholders. You really don't want to rock the boat too much because it doesn't make sense. You'll get some like Hemnet to go, you know what, let's get into vendor paid advertising. Now that is rocking the boat. But they didn't wait for a Goldilocks zone. They just ran through the door and they've released a lot of value that was literally just sitting the other side of the door. And they didn't fear doing that. I think that when people start chasing the value, it's when Goldilocks has come and gone, right? And the world has started, and they go, oh my God, I've got to get into, newspapers had to get into the internet super fast. And the only way they did that was start spending a lot of money by buying assets. News Corp bought the REA group as an example. Fairfax in Australia invested far more heavily in Domain. That was sort of this latent product. Domain, by the way, started before REA and should have been bigger than REA. But they suffocated it for too long, protecting the newspaper business, and ended up being a very distant number 2, and now owned by CoStar. They're examples of where this Goldilocks zone doesn't exist. And I think if all you ever do is think about your consumer, what is in their best interests, you will forever have a large audience. If you've got a large audience, you'll find a way to monetize it. I think that's probably the way I'd think about it. And a really good example of this is in the US, where Realtor.com was forever the biggest site. That's where everyone went to and so on. But it was controlled by the industry. So they really wanted to put little barriers around. And, we don't want to do too much innovation because we don't want to, rock the boat on our very nice 6% model that a lot of people have commented on. And then this site, Zillow, comes along and goes, you know what? Want to find out what your house is worth? Just ask us. We'll tell you. It's free. Now they've got traffic, a multiple of Realtor.com. They've got a market cap, a multiple of Realtor.com. They served the consumer first. They served the buyer first. We've always got to remember, there will always be home sellers. Always. There'll always be supply in a market. The demand is what everyone is fighting over, especially in an MLS market. You'll always have the supply side. So you've got to think about, what does the consumer want to make their life easier? I think if you start from that point, you'll end up with a good outcome.
Okay, we've come to, the end of the report, at least on the screen share here. If anybody listening doesn't want to go and read the report and just wants the, 4-word conclusion from the report, it is this: just because something is possible, feasible, and better does not mean that it will be inevitable on real estate portals. Having said that, it would be nice if these features did appear on real estate portals, and we have somebody with us now who is an expert in helping these things appear on real estate portals. Taha, could you give us as much specifically, what can SearchSmartly help a real estate portal to do? Features that you can help them build, things that you can help them test. Give us as much specifics as you can.
Yeah, sounds good, Ed. So the key point really is we can help portals at any stage of their journey. So we've talked a lot about what the future holds, but we don't necessarily have to help portals jump straight from basic classifieds to full AI-led search. There's many incremental steps, almost like building blocks in a Lego set, that we work with our clients on to deliver real user value, to pave the way for what that future of AI-led search might hold. So for example, we have commute-based search, isochrones, and commute time calculations that we offer, which is a simple integration that can massively improve user experience, as we talked about earlier. Another sort of thing that we do is we have a computer vision model that can look at your photos and automatically extract rich tags, which allows for better tagging, better filtering. And the beauty of these different building blocks is that they can then eventually be used exactly in their initially integrated form to power an LLM-based search, for example. So the step to go from 0 to full AI-led search is often these little building blocks. We also have something that we call Smart Score, which is around helping consumers understand what makes a particular location special, especially if you're not so familiar with it. Is this area particularly good for local schools or green space or for public transport? So it helps really drive location context and intelligence. So yeah, we've got a whole host of different products, and we're always happy to chat informally with portals that are curious, want to just learn from what we've learned with other portals. We're always happy to have that sort of chat informally, give free advice, and that can always be the first step towards any major transformation as well.
And yeah, I'm going to give the typical, the thing that Simon Baker always says at this point, and I'm really going to mean it, I promise. Having spent months of my life looking at all of these real estate portals and being frustrated with the lack of features, the lack of kind of user centricity, we'll call it, I can genuinely say I love what you guys are doing, truly. If anyone wants to catch you, they'll find you at Property Portal Watch in Madrid from the 15th to the 17th of October, and you'll be on stage presenting as well. Taha, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much for sponsoring the report. And yeah, we truly love what you're doing.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Simon, for the opportunity. And yeah, see you in Madrid.
Great. Thank you, and see you in Madrid.